doctrines of the gospel are much preached, who like the preaching and like to hear about God and all these things, and yet are unconverted. And no doubt multitudes of them get into the churches because they love orthodox preaching, when, after all, it is manifest that they are not doers of the word. And here is the difficulty. They have not had that searching preaching that made them see the truth and is bearing on themselves. And now they are in the church. Whenever the truth is preached in its practical relation to them, they show the enmity of their hearts unchanged by rising up in opposition to truth. They took it for granted that they were Christians and so joined the church because they could hear sound doctrinal preaching and approve of it, or because they read the Bible and approved of it. If their faith be not so practical as to influence their conduct, if they do not view the truth in its relation to their own practice, their faith does not affect them so much as the faith of the devil. Great injury has been done by false representations regarding the wickedness of real Christians. A celebrated preacher, not long since, is said to have given this definition of a Christian: a little grace and a great deal of devil. I utterly deny this definition. It is false and ruinous. A great deal is said that makes an impression that real Christians are the wickedest beings on the face of the earth. It is true that when they do sin, they incur great guilt. For a Christian to sin is highly criminal. And it is also true that enlightened Christians see in their sins great wickedness. When they compare their obligations with their lives, they are greatly humbled and express their humility in very strong language. But it is not true that they are as bad as the devil, or anywhere in the neighborhood of it. This is perfectly demonstrable. When they do sin, their sins have great aggravation and appear extremely wicked in the sight of God. But to suppose that men are real Christians while they live in the service of the devil and have little of even the appearance of religion is a sentiment that is not only false, but a very dangerous tendency. It is calculated to encourage all that class of hypocrites who are antinomians, and to encourage backsliders, as well as to do a great injury to the cause of Christ in the estimation of scorners. The truth is, those who do not obey God are not Christians. The contrary doctrine is ruinous to the churches by filling them up with multitudes who claim to piety depends on their adoption of certain notions, while they never heartily intended to obey the requirements of the gospel in their lives. Those who are so much more zealous for doctrines than for practice, and who lay much more stress on that class of doctrines which relate to God than on that class which relate to their own conduct, are antinomians. There are many who will receive that class of the doctrines of the Bible that relate to God and approve and love them who have not a particle of religion, those who are never fed, as they call it, on any preaching but that of certain abstract points of doctrine, are antinomians. They are the very persons against whom the Apostle James wrote this epistle. They make religion to consist in a set of notions, while they do not lead holy lives. That class of professors of religion who never like to hear about God or His attributes or mode of existence, the Trinity, decrees, election, and the like, but lay all stress on religious practice to the exclusion of religious doctrine, are Pharisees. They make great pretensions to outward piety and perhaps to inward flights of emotion of a certain poetic cast, while they will not receive the great truths that relate to God, but deny the fundamental doctrines of the gospel. The proper end and tendency of all right doctrine, when truly believed, is to produce correct practice. Wherever you find a man's practice heretical, you may be sure his belief is heretical too. The faith that he holds in his heart is just as heretical as his life. He may not be heretical in his notions and theories. He may be right there, even on the very points where he is heretical in practice, but he does not really believe it. For illustration, see that careless sinner there, grasping wealth and rushing headlong in a search for riches. Does that man truly believe he is ever going to die? Perhaps you will say, he knows he must die. But I say, While he is in this attitude, he does not actually believe he is ever going to die. The subject is one which is not before his thoughts at all, and thus it is, therefore, impossible that he should believe it in his utter thoughtlessness. You ask him if he ever expect ever to die, and he will reply, "Oh yes, I know I must die. All men are mortal." As soon as he turns his thoughts to it, he assents to the truth. And if you could fasten the conviction on his mind till he is really and permanently impressed with it, he would infallibly change his conduct and live for another world instead of this. It is just so in religion. Whatever a man really believes is just as certain to control his practice as that the will governs the conduct. The Church has for a long time acted too much on the antinomial policy. She has been sticklish for the more abstract doctrines, and left the more practical too much out of view. She has laid greater stress on orthodoxy in those doctrines that are not practical than in those that are practical. Look at the creeds of the Church, and see how they all lay the main stress on those doctrines that have little relation to our practice. A man may be the greatest heretic on points of practice, provided he is not openly profane and vicious, and yet maintains a good standing in the Church, whether his life corresponds with the gospel or not. Is not this monstrous? And hence we see that when it is attempted to purify the Church in regard to practical errors, she cannot bear it. Why else is it that so much excitement is produced by attempting to clear the Church from participation in sins of intemperance and Sabbath breaking and slavery? Why is it so difficult to induce the Church to do anything effectual for the conversion of the world? Oh, when shall the Church be purified, or the world converted? Not till it is a settled point that heresy in practice is the proof of heresy in belief. Not while a man may deny the whole gospel in his practice every day, and yet maintain his standing in the Church as a good Christian. See how a minister may be deceived in regard to the state of his congregation. He preaches a good deal on the abstract doctrines that do not immediately relate to practice, and his people say they are fed and rejoice in it, and he thinks they are growing in grace, when in fact it is no certain sign that there is any religion among them. It is manifest that this is not certain evidence. But if when he preaches practical doctrines, his people show that they love the truth in relation to themselves, and show it by practicing it, then they give evidence of real love to the truth. If a minister find that his people love abstract doctrinal preaching, but that when he comes to press the practical doctrines they rebel, he may be sure that if they have any religion, it is in a low state. And if he find on fair trial that he cannot bring them up to it so as to receive practical doctrine, he may be satisfied they have not a particle of religion, but are a mere company of antinomians, who think they can go to heaven on a dead faith in abstract orthodoxy. See what a vast multitude of professors of religion there are who are deceiving themselves. Many suppose they are Christians from the emotions they feel and view the truth, when in fact what they receive is truth presented to their minds in such a way that they do not see its bearing on themselves. If you bring the truth so to bear on them as to destroy their pride and cut them off from their worldliness, such professors resist it. Look abroad upon the Church. See what a multitude of Orthodox churches and Orthodox Christians live and feed upon the abstract doctrines of religion from year to year. Then look farther at their lives and see how little influence their professed belief has upon their practice. Have they saving faith? It cannot be. I do not mean to say that none of these church members are pious, but I do say that those who do not adopt and practice what they admit in theory, who are hearers of the word but not doers, deceive themselves. Inquire now, how many of you really believe the truths you hear preached? I propose to preach a course of practical lectures. I do not mean that I shall preach lectures that have no doctrine in them. That is not preaching at all. But what I desire is to see whether you will, as a church, do what you believe to be true. If I do not succeed in convincing you that any doctrine I may maintain is really true, that is another affair. That is reason enough why you should not do it. But if I do succeed in proving from the Scriptures and convincing your understanding that it is true, and yet you do not practice it, I shall then have the evidence before my own eyes what your character is, and no longer deceive myself with the ideas that this is a Christian church. Are you conscious that the gospel is producing a practical effect upon you, according to your advancement in knowledge? Is it weaning you from the world? Do you find this to be your experience, that when you receive any practical truth into your minds, you love it, and love to feel its application to yourself, and take pleasure in practicing it? If you are not growing in grace, becoming more and more holy, yielding yourselves up to the influence of the gospel, you are deceiving yourselves. How is it now with you who are elders of this church? How is it with you who are heads of families, all of you? When you hear a sermon, do you seize hold of it and take it home to you and practice it? Or do you receive it into your minds and approve of it and never practice it? Woe to that man who admits the truth and yet turns away and does not practice it, like the man beholding his natural face in a glass, turning away and forgetting what manner of man he was. Thank you. This is William Crockett again, reading a sermon from Charles G. Finney. In the grace of our Lord Jesus, take a hold of the truths you have received and do the work of Christ in this present time.